Can you describe seeing your recipient for the first time after transplant?
The first time I saw Vicky after transplant was the following morning after her transplant in the ICU. And it was a little shocking. She had a lot of hoses and tubes, and she wasn't able to communicate, and she was on a lot of pain medication. But my daughter and I were there, and we were, in full support of her. She looked worse than I think she really was. I know she was in a better state of mind at that point because she knew she was on the way to recovery after that.
The first time I saw my husband after transplant, it was shocking. It's still, I have that picture burned in my brain. And it's a good picture. So happy to see him alive. But to see him restrained in the bed and to see him on I guess it's called a ventilator, where there's a tube shoved down his throat. So it really kind of one of the things that shocked me about it is what an unnatural position it looked like his head was in, walking in right away and seeing him right away. Definitely kind of one of those moments where you really want to have a hand to hold on to. I guess that would be the best way to describe it. Because as much information as you're given, and UCSF is awesome about giving you information, but until you're actually walking through it or you see it and it's translated into real life, it's an entirely different thing. It's kind of like that head knowledge, heart knowledge thing. So just seeing him was shocking, but joyful. And was so happy the doctor had said that the transplant had gone exactly the way it should. It was a textbook transplant, took 8 hours, and but very, very emotional to see him like that.
Seeing Daryl for the first time after his transplant was shocking. He had a lot of tubes everywhere. He was very pasty white and frail looking, but he still had his smile. And I was just so grateful he was alive and well that nothing else mattered.
Oh, I could still remember the first time I saw Michelle come out from the surgery, and to say she was between white and gray would have been really the best description. She was in surgery for quite some time, but it was a big relief to see her come out.
This one is hard because seeing my mom for the first time after transplant was almost 12 hours after we saw her wheeled off. And that was because they evidently forgot to tell us that her surgery was completed and that she was in ICU. So 2.5, 3 hours later, we finally got up and asked where she was, and they said, oh, she's been here for 2 hours. We were wondering where her family was. So at that point, I had already melted down and was beyond the point of my own ability to keep it together. So seeing her after waiting for almost 12 hours was a huge relief. I wasn't expecting to see her with the mask, totally intubated and basically unconscious, but at the same time I was so relieved to see her and see the machines showing that she was vital and breathing and okay that it was amazing. In retrospect, I really wish we wouldn't have waited to ask the status on that. We were really trying to give the doctors enough, breathing room to do what they needed to do, and if there was a complication, we certainly didn't want to interfere in that, but we wished after the fact that we had gone ahead and asked the question after 6 or 7 hours when we were expecting to hear something, what there was to know, instead of waiting back and letting them come to us. And that has been the case all along since after transplant as well. We have learned to ask those questions early on instead of waiting for someone to come back with the answer, not because we don't think they're interested in giving us a response, but because everyone is busy, obviously, and they get done with one thing and they move right into the next, and everything is critical in this area. So we learned that from the very first day of transplant. You got to go ahead and ask the question.
I can remember seeing my wife for the first time after the transplant, and I've never seen so many tubes coming out of one person. It was just amazing. It was heartrending.
The first time I saw my husband was after surgery, and he was getting wheeled from the elevator to intensive care. I had seen other patients getting wheeled that same area, so I knew what to expect, plus we had been prepared. But he had a big IV in his neck, and he was on a breathing machine. His arms were tied down. But it really wasn't scary because I knew what to expect. After that, I stayed with him as best as possible because they have to prepare him at the ICU. Then they had me come back in, and I was right there when he woke up, which was wonderful, and that's all he remembers is that I was right there. So I recommend stay with him as best you can.
The first time I saw Rudy after transplant, it was a surreal experience. I was with, my daughter was there, and Rudy's sister was there, and she saw that when they came out of OR, that they go down this small hallway and go into intensive care. And Rudy's surgery was rather long, so I had a lot of anxiety. And all of a sudden, we saw him on the gurney. Oh, I'm sorry. And it was surreal. It was the hospital, it was 4 o'clock in the morning. It was quiet, it was dim. There was not a lot of people out. And they brought him from OR into intensive care, wrapped up. And he looked like a cocoon from afar, and with the breathing machines going, so you could hear the machines. And we both were overcome with emotion. It was very overwhelming, but it was a sense of relief, too, that he was out of OR. When Rudy came out of surgery, I remember he came out around at 4 o'clock in the morning, and so by 9:30 in the morning, we were allowed to go into intensive care. He was hooked up to a lot of equipment, 2 blood pressure cuffs, the breathing machine, so a lot of monitors and equipments, and he looked good. He looked good. I tried not to focus so much on the equipment as looking at him, and it was just an overall good feeling to see that he had come through the surgery and was starting this new journey, this new recovery for himself. So
seeing my husband for the first time after transplant was kind of surreal. It was overwhelming. I felt that I was really given a good indication ahead of time what he would look like with all the tubes and everything, but still going in, there was a lot more connections than I thought there would be. His coloring was very poor. It was white as a sheet, and with the respirator, it was scary. And I kind of warned my kids before they went to see their dad. I said, be prepared because it's a scary situation. It was overwhelming.
When I first saw Tom, I really felt overwhelmed in the sense of I knew that someone else was suffering, but I was extremely happy because my husband was doing really well. I felt very grateful, but yet very humbled. And it was a wonderful feeling to know that my husband had a second chance.